to kind of look back at it so you're prepared for the lecture on Tuesday. Okay. We got the opportunity because by moving the test off by a day to basically take a look at World War II from basically two different sides, and it's actually kind of a natural division. Today we're going to talk about the home front. Tuesday we're going to talk about the war. Now, as far as AP exam, the thing that they are more interested in would be the stuff we're talking about today. Social developments, things like that. The AP exam does not delve into wars as much. What Tuesday lecture does is it sets up what life is going to be after the war. And so it's hugely important transitionally, but there probably wouldn't be as much of direct questions on it on the AP exam, if that makes sense. Okay? So, when last we met, Japan bombs Pearl Harbor, and the United States declares war on Japan. Well, the United States was not ready for war. And we can all think back to World War I. Remember how in World War I, the United States had been selling all that stuff in Europe, but then all of a sudden is in the war and isn't ready itself for the fight? Rinse and repeat. Same thing happens. And in fact, as you're preparing for the test, one thing you might do is just make a quick little chart of things that are similar and different between the United States going into these two wars. And you're going to find that it's a mirror image. A lot of the things are very much the same. In fact, some people think it's all actually one war with just a big intermission. Okay? So, to get ready for this war, what the United States government is going to do is it's going to pass what is known as the War Powers Act. Now later, when we talk about the 1970s, in the 1970s we're going to pass another law that was known as the War Powers Act. But the 1970s law was a limitation law. That the power of the president had gotten too much. In this case, President Nixon had started to bomb countries like Cambodia without informing Congress at all. And so in the 1970s, they put a limitation on the power of the president. But in 1941, when they passed this War Powers Act, what they're going to do is they're going to give President Roosevelt unprecedented control over all aspects of the war effort. Basically, what it will allow FDR to do is that if he thinks it's necessary for the war effort, he can issue an executive order and say, do it. Okay, so this is authorized by Congress. Now, this is the beginning. I'm not sure if it's truly the beginning. You saw some evidence of this, maybe all the way back in the presidency of Andrew Jackson, where the president is grabbing more power. You saw it again with Theodore Roosevelt, the president grabbing more power. Well, here, Congress is basically just giving it. President, you are large and in charge. And so when we kind of think as this is the beginning of what we call the imperial presidency, where in the United States the person who is the leader is really the president, and that's not that much different. But what Congress becomes is more of a reactive body. Okay. the president says we're doing this, and Congress says, oh, okay. Now, perhaps the best example of this is what happens to American foreign policy. In World War II is the very, very last formally declared war in American history so far. We have not formally declared war since World War II. Instead, what has happened is the president has decided that we needed to take action. The president starts to take action, and then Congress turns around later and says, okay, we'll authorize that. We're okay with it. We'll pay for it. But they never actually, okay, fully declare war. The other thing that the Congress will do is they will pass a law to pay for the war. They passed what was known as the Revenue Act of 1942, which takes something that had been in existence for a little while, the income tax. But the original income tax had only basically applied to a select number of Americans. We will call them the super, super, super wealthy. Well, in 1942, they increased the number of people that now have to pay income tax tenfold. And this will combine with another policy that the United States government is going to do. When the Republicans were in power, does anyone know what's the main way that they paid for government? With the tariff. Well, when the Democrats are now going to win 7 out of the next 9 elections, and they are going to move away from high tariffs as the main way of getting revenue. They are going to move us closer to what is known as free trade, which means that you don't have super high tariffs on imported goods, okay? So, if you're not having the tariffs, how then are you going to be paying for government overall with the income tax? And so if you're thinking of trending, what you see here is kind of the end of the trend of the big tariff, and the beginning of the trend of government mainly being financed by income tax. Well, a moment ago, I said there was a similarity between World War I and World War II as far as how the United States was caught off guard. Should have been off guard, but off guard. They were not ready to fight in World War I. They're also off guard, even though they probably should not have been off guard, fighting World War II. In World War I, what did they do to make it so that the government could take the economy from a peacetime economy and make it a wartime economy? Well, they basically created a whole bunch of boards and commissions that were designed to transform the economy. World War II, in order to transform the economy from a peacetime economy into a wartime economy, we're going to create a whole bunch of boards and commissions. Most important of which was the War Production Board. And what this War Production Board is going to do is it's going to orchestrate the production necessary to fight. They are going to orchestrate the production of 40 billion bullets, 300,000 aircraft, 76,000 ships, 86,000 tanks, and 2.6 million machine guns. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a lot of war stuff. Okay, so you've taken your economy and you are now making the stuff, and you're making for the United States. Yeah.
Is this for the U.S. or for Britain?
This is our production during the war. So if it was necessary for Britain, okay, but it's what we're producing. In order to make this much stuff, you need to start making choices. And so much like in World War I, we are once again going to say to non-essential industries, okay, candy cane making, no longer necessary. Okay, everything needs to be for the war effort. Everything needs to be focused. Everybody focused. We got a war fight. Non-essential items are not manufactured, and even essential items will be limited. So an example of this, here in Los Angeles, which became a booming metropolis during World War II. It was one of the centers of the war manufacturing industry. Well, because of that, what do you have to build? If you're becoming a big center for manufacturing, there's some side thing that has to develop along with it. Yeah, all these people, what do they need?
Transportation.
Maybe transportation, housing. Okay, people need places to live. Well, the stuff you need to build homes and stuff like that. You draw anything, you're taking away from the war effort. And so what you're going to have to do is make it so that when you're building these things, you do them very limitedly. So, the community, one of the communities that was developed during the war was the suburb for Los Angeles, Westchester. Okay, yeah. Okay, so any Westchester people here? Okay, all right, Westchester. So, all right, then in Westchester, houses are built. My house was built in 1942. And what was notable about my house that was built in 1942? Tiny, tiny little thing. Okay, when I bought it, it was 960 square feet. It's tiny little bedrooms, bathroom that's barely qualifying in the bathroom department. Okay, and that's it. And the reason why they were so small, in fact, the land was pretty big, so we added on. But why was it so small initially? You didn't want to draw from the necessary stuff for the war effort. So even for housing, which is necessary, you're putting limitations on it. The other thing that the government's going to do is they are going to offer to industry what we call cost-plus contracts. Now, what was a cost-plus contract? It was, hey, Nick, your company, can you make me 10,000 guns by next week? If you do, I guarantee you a profit. And so Nick goes, yeah, my company can do that. Guaranteed profit. Basically, it's the government's going to say, hey, we need this so badly that we're not going to mess around trying to get the lowest bidder or anything like that. We're just looking for the company that can fulfill the contract and do it now, because we need the guns yesterday. So if you can do it, we are guaranteeing you a profit. During the war, they're going to basically suspend all antitrust prosecution. So, slip of the tongue. Think of remember Teddy Roosevelt, the trust buster. Okay, he was basically against these companies becoming too big, too powerful, right? And he would sue them under the Sherman Antitrust Act to make sure that we kept competition. Well, basically during the war, who cares about competition? If you can make me the guns, if you can get, and you need to buy up a whole bunch of little companies to make it so you can make more, you can make it so I can get more guns, by all means, go for it. I will not stand in your way. So what basically is the United States government allowing to have to kind of happen here during the war?
Corruption.
Maybe corruption, and that's a very good point. But let's just do it on the economic side. What's that? Maybe monopolies. Is business getting smaller or is business making bigger? And how about the relationship? And this might fold into that corruption idea. The relationship between the government and military manufacturers. What is it? It's getting close. This is the beginning of what a later president by the name of Dwight Eisenhower will call the military-industrial complex. That basically the two forces start feeding upon one another. Government money and purchase of military goods and military spending. During the war, we also see huge improvements in how manufacturing is done. Most notably by a shipbuilder, steelmaker by the name of Henry Kaiser. The Kaiser, actually the name, anyone, so you think of Kaiser here in Southern California, you think of what?
Kaiser Permanente.
Kaiser Permanente. Yes, that is the same Kaiser. What Kaiser Permanente was is, remember when we were talking about in the 1920s welfare capitalism, okay, where companies started basically offering certain benefits for their employees to try and take care of them in lieu of labor unions in effect getting weaker. Well, Kaiser Permanente was actually Henry Kaiser's healthcare plan for his workers. Okay, that's where that is its development. Anyway, what Henry Kaiser is going to do in manufacturing is he is going to take good old Henry Ford's ideas on mass production, and he's going to apply them to shipbuilding. Now, in my imagination, I'm thinking of like this giant assembly line with an aircraft carrier moving down it. Probably didn't happen, but basically it's the same idea. You've got all the jobs broken up into smaller and smaller things. Remember that the skilling, make it so everybody's doing the same thing faster. And what will happen is using these ideas, Henry Kaiser is going to dramatically increase American production. Yeah.
Didn't the Axis powers, like the Germans, use like mass production for tanks
Yes,
and stuff too?
they did too. And so what are we playing here? Catch up.
Catch up, okay.
So this is why this point is so important, because Germany has had almost a decade head start.
So then what did we do before for ships and stuff?
Well, we had it. There was mass production, but it wasn't, it wasn't as carefully done. They didn't. It was one of those things where you build a ship and you bring the workers in, and what we're doing here is kind of a hurry up offense. We're taking what we were doing before and we're speeding it up. We're taking, remember that scientific management stuff, and we're applying it. We're trying to get every second faster that we can do.
Right.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
What is it called again when a war depends on who has the most resources?
I'm not sure. I mean, are you taking like a war of attrition where
Yeah,
okay. So outlast your opponent.
Yeah.
And so on this production thing, and both of your questions are spot on, because do not say that this is a replacement. I mean, the United States fighting in the war, as soldiers and whatnot, is absolutely crucial for the Allies to win. But they would not have had that opportunity. They would not have been able to be put in the position of doing this if not for the production. The fact that the Army had the guns, the tanks, the everything like that they needed to win to be able to play catch up in the way that they did was this amazing production of the United States. And so if you're really boiling it down, you're having to make a choice. Was it A or was it B? Is it the American Army or is it American industrial power? It's American industrial power that wins this war. During this war, we are going to get 15 million men and 216,000 women who are going to join the armed forces, including my dad, by the way. Now everybody imagine you've just taken your labor supply and subtracted out, okay, 15 million people. Okay? What does that do to your labor supply? Yeah, very much lowers it. And at the very same time, what are we doing with our industrial production? We are doing what at that very same time? We're increasing. And so your demand for labor is going up and your available laborers are going down. Okay, that's huge, right? You gotta fill that gap. And so what the United States government's gonna do is it's gonna start taking action to try and fill the void. Now the first void is actually in agriculture. And the reason why there was such a void in agriculture is, everybody imagine, okay, there are jobs out there. There is one set of jobs in agriculture and there's another set of jobs in manufacturing. Which pays more? Manufacturing. So if you were in agriculture at the time, and now there's the higher paying manufacturing job, what you doing? You're taking this job, right? So what job is absolutely empty as far as jobs, as people filling the jobs? Was agriculture. And so what the United States is going to do is it's going to increase the agriculture laborers by making a deal with Mexico. We begin a migrant worker program known as the Bracero or Strong Arm Program, where basically to replace the lack of workers in this sector of the economy, we will bring additional workers in. The second way that the shortage of labor will be filled is by the famous, okay, Rosie the Riveter program. And all call goes out to women, okay? You are needed to help build the bombs, okay? Come and work in American factories. And a huge result here. Some 6 million women will now just join the workforce. In doing this, whenever you have, a solution to one problem, what sometimes is the result of the solution to one problem? It causes another problem. Okay? And so what became the problem with this large number of women joining the workforce is that many of these people had families. And if you've got both people in the family are working, both parents in the family are working, what do you do about the kids? And so what does the government now have to do? Because they need these people coming into the workforce, they absolutely have to have them in order to build those bombs, in order to win the war. And so what they do is the government is now going to sponsor daycare. Okay, so something that would have been, no, the government providing daycare, no. For the war effort, daycare. Okay. Women entering the workforce, however, even though there was a high demand for labor, women will still face discrimination. It could be as simple as, let's say there was a white male worker and there was a female worker, and there was one particular job that was a higher paid one. Who got it? Yeah, okay. And then speaking of pay, even if a male and a female were doing exactly the same job, okay? There's a guy riveting those rivets into the airplane, and next to the guy is a woman riveting the rivets into the airplane, okay? The pay, the pay for these two workers standing side by side, okay? Okay, worker A, okay, male, worker B, female. Worker A, okay, male, getting about 20 bucks, okay? All right, 20 bucks a week. It was pretty good back then. Worker B, 6 bucks. Okay? Identical job, okay? But an absolutely, I say unequal, but it's staggeringly unequal wages. The Rosie the Riveter program, don't tell me you have not seen this poster before in your life. I mean, if you went to get the pass to leave this classroom, okay, you know, so people who escape, right? You see, okay, the Rosie the Riveter poster right here. So this is the famous, okay, We Can Do It campaign. Now, another slogan, by the way, was this one. The woman he left behind is still behind him. She's a woman ordnance worker. Okay, so everybody think of this power couple, okay? He shoots the Nazis, she builds the bombs, okay? All right. And then, okay, here, everybody, this is subliminal help on the test. Okay, has everybody got that? All right, if you see this, think that. Okay. That is Rosie. Okay? And she is riveting. It's basically, there's like these little bolts that just basically a gun just shoots into affixed sheets of metal to one another. The other group that would be brought into the workforce, okay, the other group that will be brought into the workforce will be African Americans from the South. You guys remember, back in World War I, we talked about the beginnings of the Great Migration for a similar purpose, people working in war factories in World War I. Well, the Great Migration continued during the 1920s. In the 1930s, when there were no jobs for anybody, anywhere, it kind of stopped. The war fires it up again. But this migration is not only from the south to the north, it's also to the west, most notably Los Angeles, okay? Most notably here. Now, African American workers will face similar problems that women did. Discrimination. Well, there was this union worker slash civil rights activist by the name of A. Philip Randolph. What A. Philip Randolph is going to do is he's going to put the word out there basically saying that this discrimination, this segregation that was happening in industry had to stop. And what he does is he starts to basically threaten calling for a huge march on Washington, D.C., where African Americans across the United States would all march on Washington, basically saying, hey, look at the racist government of the United States. So now everybody think for a moment. Who is the United States fighting in World War II?
The racist government.
The racist government of Germany, right? Okay, so we're fighting the super racists, and we're kind of feeling we're in a good place, right? Does that look good on the scorecard? Okay, if you are, supposedly fighting this big racist thing, and all of a sudden there's a huge giant march saying, yeah, racist too. Okay? So, what does FDR do? He is going to issue an executive order. Okay? He is going to issue what is known as Executive Order 8802. And what Executive Order 8802 does is it prohibits discrimination in the defense industries, and yes, this was racial discrimination. It did not talk about gender discrimination. It also set up an entity to enforce this, known as the Fair Employment Practices Commission. Now, I want you to all stop and think here for a moment, though. Is FDR issuing this because, oh, I think it's the right thing, I ought to do this today? Or did he get pushed? He got pushed. Okay? So he pushed into this. What happens during World War II is we get, in effect, the igniting of the civil rights movement. Okay, so during the war, you are going to get people who are going to take advantage of a saying that had developed during the war. There was a saying during the war that people said, V is for victory. Well, so what civil rights leaders are going to do during the war is like, not V, double V. V, victory over the dictators abroad, and V, victory over racism at home. Okay, double V. Now, you can measure the effect here. If you look at the membership rolls of civil rights organizations like the NAACP or CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, you're going to see a huge spike, okay, as far as membership. And why is this so ultimately important? Is what happens in the years after the war. The great civil rights movement in the 1950s, 1960s. These were basically the lining up of the troops for that movement. And then just final note on this. Everybody take a look at the corner here. Okay, Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Okay, here, this is a poster of the speech he gives on a march on Washington, protesting the racist policies of the United States government. This is essentially the realization of the threat that had been made by A. Philip Randolph. A. Philip Randolph will be at this march as an honored guest. another board that the United States government is going to set up during World War II. It was known as the War Labor Board. It basically was governing the labor supply. What will alarm the War Labor Board is the fact that as you get all of these manufacturing jobs and you have a shortage of labor, what are companies going to do to make it so that that laborer came to work for your company rather than the other company? You're going to raise wages. And so for American workers, they're going, yes! Finally, I was eating my shoe last year. But now, okay, I have the ability to make some serious cash. These higher wages, however, made it so that economists became to fear inflation. That if everybody's all of a sudden making a whole bunch more money, and on top of that, you are only manufacturing mainly essential items in the economy, what is going to happen to the prices of those remaining unessential items that are out there? What's going to happen to the price of those goods? Skyrocket. And so what the War Labor Board is going to do is they are going to pass a regulation that basically places a ceiling on wages. Okay, y'all heard of the minimum wage? Meet the maximum wage. You may not pay a worker anything more than beep. Okay? So, you're an American worker. How are you feeling about maximum wage? Is this something that you're loving so much?
No.
No. And so, the United Mine Workers who are basically mining things like the steel, the iron you need to make the steel for ships and tanks, the coal miners that are mining the coal that you need for running your factories. Well, they decide that despite making a pledge at the beginning of the war that they would not strike, when they hear about this ceiling on wages, not gonna take it. And so they walk off the job. Well, does the United States, can they allow this pivotal group of workers to be off the job?
No.
And so what the Congress is going to do is pass what is known as the Smith-Connolly Anti-Strike Act, which basically says that if you are striking in an essential segment of the economy, sorry, it's illegal. Period. You are breaking the law. The U.S. government will break your strike. Not allowed to happen. All right. So I just gave you a peek as to what the United States government did to prepare for going into war, transforming its economy from an economy that was mainly at peace to one that is at war. I'd like you now to grade, okay, those preparations. So right now, give it a grade, a letter grade, and then give it a comment. Okay? So give it a grade and explain your grade. Grade and a comment. Finish up your sentence. Okay, so let's see if this can work. I'm looking for 3 volunteers that don't normally volunteer. So let's see if I can do this. So what's the grade and a quick why? What's the grade and a quick why? In 3rd grade is able to do it so.
I gave it a C plus B minus because it said like all the populations were dire and the U.S. had to play catch up. And they'd like use like any means necessary to like make sure they were prepared for battle. Like some of the bills passed, like acts passed, such as like the Bill Connolly Act, like when they did the Constitution, they limited like the rights of like workers.
Okay, excellent. Chase.
I gave them a B minus. I said they made a lot of changes and they created several acts that affected the industrial and agricultural activity, which gave people jobs, but at the cost of taking away some of their rights.
Okay, one more person. One more.
I gave it a C because I think that government has so much power over the people, but they did do a lot for the war effort to get their economy going compared to enemies. But yeah, they did have too much power in government.
And yes, a good job picking up on that more power theme. So, in the United States, when you look at when did the United States government become like what it is now? Okay? And we talked about the New Deal. We talked about the expansion of the role of government during the New Deal. The role of government, the power of government during the New Deal pales in comparison to the expansion of governmental power during World War II. Okay? That is truly when the current form of the United States government is born. Speaking of government, okay? So we'll fast forward just a wee bit to 1944. Now, in 1944, the United States has been fighting for a while, and we're now starting to see people having finished their service in the war, returning home. And what FDR is going to do is he's going to say that these people that had served their country, that had fought in this war, they deserve to be recognized for their efforts. And what he's going to call for is what he called the GI Bill of Rights. It's like a new Bill of Rights for veterans. And what he says is that these people, all of them, by the way, both men and women, they deserve basically a good education, decent housing, and effectively medical care for life. They deserve these things. And so what this speech, what this demand does, is it will set up the passage of the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944. Servicemen's Readjustment Act, it's kind of a mouthful. It is more popularly known as the GI Bill. Yeah, GI Joe. The GI Bill. Now what the GI Bill does is it provides to anybody who returned from their service in the war money to go to college. Now you may be thinking, well, really? That's not that. It was huge. Okay. In the 1940s, the percentage of Americans that went to college, tiny, small. Most people who would have fought in World War II would not have dreamed of college education. But as they are leaving the military, the United States government says, here's a check if you want to use it for education. What you going to do with, if you have this check that you can use for education, what are you going to do with that check? You can use it for education. It basically takes a population group that very, 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 very likely would not have gone to college. Almost 15 million of them. And say, here, go to college. What happens to the number of college-educated people in America? What happens to it? Goes up, way up. Well, basically, we call these people the greatest generation. Well, part of it is because they survived the Great Depression and the war. But they also became the leaders of the United States in this next generation. And what is the United States government doing with them? They are making them college trained. They are making them college educated. Okay? Secondly, the other thing that this bill did is it guaranteed you, if you had served, a cheap, near-free mortgage loan. Okay? So you've got this pot of money that you can borrow for nearly nothing. What you going to do? You're going to buy that house. Now, you probably would not have dreamed of owning a house. But now you've got the money to do it. So, not only do you have the ability to buy a house, but there's now like 15 million potential home buyers out there. What have you just done to the economy? You just expanded the economy. So, and this timing is actually spot on perfect. Because when does it really come into effect is everybody comes home from the war. And what's happening to your economy because of the war is you went from war economy to peace economy. Okay? And so you're about to have a downturn, right? But now all of a sudden money's going into construction. Construction to build homes and colleges. Because you need more colleges if you're having these 15 million people that going to college. Oh, education. You have more spending on education because you now have to have all these, you have to have people to teach the people that are going to college. It was a huge, huge, huge thing. Okay. Harley, was that going to be the point you were going to make, or?
No, I was mentioning how the GI 1 bill now offers, like, to pay rent for cost of living.
Yeah. So it's so again, is this something that's done? Is it over with, or is it something that's still around even to this?
Still around.
It's still around. So also in 1944, we are going to have an election, okay? And the Republicans, they're going, surely he is done, right? I mean, come on. You know, we gave you a pass, we let you do the 3 instead of 2. Please don't tell me that you can count to 4. You can count to 4, can't you? And so what FDR does in 1944, after breaking the 2-term tradition in 1940, he shatters it by running for a 4th term in 1944. Basically, he runs as the indispensable man. And you can imagine where this comes from. This is the guy who got the United States through the Depression. This is the guy who has gotten us through the war thus far. If you were, imagine you were about 18 years old at that time. You might, in some states, be allowed to vote for the very first time in this election. This guy's been the only president you know. Who could be running the country besides FDR? But something interesting happens in this election that hadn't happened in the past. All of a sudden, a position that is never important, okay, filled by John Nance Garner in the first term, Henry Wallace, not Mr. Wallace that you see on campus, but Henry Wallace has been the vice president for the last 2 terms. Well, when they looked at Henry Wallace and they went, what if something were to happen to FDR? Henry Wallace for president. Now this guy was this radical New Dealer guy, maybe really good at social programs, but run the mighty nation, the United States during war? Egad, no. And so they tell Mr. Wallace, boop, you are no longer going to be the vice presidential candidate because we're a little bit worried. And so FDR is basically given a list of potential people that could run with him. From that list, he is going to choose this senator who is known for prosecuting companies that had sought to profiteer during the war. He's squeaky clean as far as corruption is concerned. He is a war vet, okay? His name was Harry S. And by the way, what?
Is he the president where the S stands for nothing?
That is his middle name. His middle name is S. So there's an argument as to whether or not grammatically you put the period or not. When they ask him, he says he doesn't care. So some people put it in, some people don't. The Harry S. Memorial, the Harry S. Truman Memorial site does not have an S. Okay. So I took.
How old is FDR?
How old? He's only in his 60s, but you know there's some people that are young in their 60s, and there are other people that are kind of old in their 60s. He old in his 60s, okay? Because remember he was fighting a debilitating illness of polio, so he was never peaky health after that. The Republicans are going to run the governor of New York. So the Republicans had actually won the governor of New York, which was kind of a thing. They hadn't really been, I don't think, governor of New York since Theodore Roosevelt. They didn't win there often. But now there was a popular governor in New York by the name of Thomas Dewey. Well, do we or don't we? And as far as, hey, Mr. Dewey, would you fight the war any differently than President Roosevelt? Probably not. Would you make major changes in the economy? Well, things are going pretty well right now, so yeah, no. So, what makes you, well, a better candidate than President Roosevelt? And pretty much it's, well, are you kidding me? 4th term? What? Okay, so that's going to be one thing. And by the way, newspapers across the country will endorse Dewey on that stand alone. That we should not be electing somebody to a 4th term. It's sounding a little bit like a dictatorship. The other thing that the Republicans are going to do is what the Democrats did with John McCain back in 2008, okay? Ooh, he looked old. And so they're going to just basically say that basically Roosevelt is too old and not healthy enough to be president anymore. However, you've got Roosevelt, all you know is Roosevelt, who has done the thing of getting you through the Depression, Roosevelt, who has gotten you through the war so far, Roosevelt, who are you going to vote for? Roosevelt. And so Roosevelt wins, the war's going well. But hey, look, everybody, he nearly got triple digits on Roosevelt, okay? You know, look at that. Nearly got triple digits. Almost broke 100 electoral votes, Thomas Dewey did.
Is that because they like kept saying he was old?
Well, actually, let's take a look at the map, see who votes. I'm blaming isolation land, okay? Nebraska still thinks we should not be at war. And obviously, Vermont and Maine never voted Roosevelt, never will.
What is up with Vermont
Cat
and Maine for
slogan.
never voting?
I don't know. They also didn't vote for Theodore Roosevelt when he ran as a progressive.
Is that their like state slogan?
No Roosevelts here. no Roosevelts allowed. Okay. All right. Yeah.
So do you think it's because they just don't want government involvement?
It might be. So the one thing, Vermont, at that time, it was Coolidge land. It was Coolidge's home state. He was very conservative. Okay, so now it's Bernie Sanders, so it's not Coolidge land anymore. But back then it was Coolidge. All right, so let's bring it on home. This is we're just going to do some last kind of commentary as to what life was like here in the United States during the war. And basically, the one thing you can kind of say about the United States during World War II is that even though the United States escaped devastation, everybody just, in your mind's eye, think of Britain having the living daylights bombed out of it. Europe having armies tramp across it. China invaded. Japan bombed. Germany bombed. Okay? Everybody is getting just crushed. The United States. No. But yeah, I mean, really, that's about that. Really, it's the best we can do. Seriously, if you take out Pearl Harbor, nothing else. Anyway, but World War II profoundly changes the United States. What the country is before World War II and what the country is after World War II, it's different countries practically. Okay, it is profoundly and irrevocably just changed. Well, during the war, much like World War I, okay, so I can use that almost like a slogan. We're going to try and make it so that everybody's kind of on the same page. And what we're going to do, just like in World War I, is that we're going to have an entity, this time it's known as the Office of War Information, which is going to provide us with plenty of propaganda to make sure that we know why we're fighting. Know what we're doing is for some greater cause. If you were working in Nolens as in the Higgins boat factory, okay, there's the landing craft that they used in various assaults. Have a big poster hanging over your head, okay, banner that says, "The guy who relaxes is helping the Axis." Okay? I mean, the messages were everywhere. That if you're still here, if you're not overseas with a gun, okay, you need to be still part of this war effort. You need to be doing something. You even saw it in popular entertainment, the pop culture, the songs, okay, the movies. Any of you fans of It's a Wonderful Life, the movie? Okay, so the director was Frank Capra, okay, well, during the war, he produced a documentary series known as Why We Fight. And it's actually a pretty cool one. If you, I bet you can find it in YouTube. Basically, it's a loving interpretation as to why the United States is at war. If you were living day to day, it's not like in World War I where Herbert Hoover was telling you, it's Wheatless Wednesday. Instead of a campaign asking you to give up stuff, the government is just simply going to tell you. The United States government is going to issue ration cards. And what these ration cards will do is they'll have like it will be a little book and it'll have little tickets in it. And you can only buy items in which there is a ticket. So this week, in the ticket book, it says that I can get a side of beef, a pair of shoes, and a tire. So guess what I can buy this week? Okay. Well, since it's full economy and I have the money, I'm going to get the side of beef, the pair of shoes, and the tire. Even if I don't have a car, I'm going to get the tire because I can. Okay. Most people abided by the ration system. However, we do estimate that about a quarter of Americans will at some time deviate, okay, and go into an underground market, okay, to buy stuff that they might need. And that's where the tire comes in, okay? So I didn't need the tire, but what can I do in this market? I can sell the tire. And now what might I do with the money I just sold? I am going to buy another side of beef because I am hungry. I do not want to eat the tire. Yeah.
Did the ration system affect like lower income families?
It's not a it's you still had to have the money to buy whatever. You just were not permitted to buy anything if you didn't have the stamp for it. Does that make sense? So it wasn't like stamps that you trade. It's only that you're only allowed to purchase what you had a stamp for. Okay.
For that week, or you couldn't just save up a bunch of ration cards?
No, there was particular weeks for particular things. Yeah.
Was it by state or?
It was a national program, but federally done. So I don't know if they printed regional books or if it was one book fits all. Okay.
Sold ration cards?
The other thing that happens in the United States that is transformed by the war is where people live. Now, I already gave you one example. I talked about African Americans in the South moving to the North and now also to the West. Well, other people were also affected by the war as far as where they're going to end up living. And one example is simply people who went off to go fight. Okay, so Justin, you lived in North Dakota, just outside Bismarck, and you sign up to be a Marine. Okay, and you're about to be stationed. You're out in the South Seas. Okay, you're going to have to go fight in the Battle of Tarawa. But before you go, you train at Camp Pendleton. Okay? And there you were on that January morning at Camp Pendleton, and you noticed something kind of funky. It was 71 degrees. And you go, wait. Is this legal? Can it actually be 71 degrees in January? And so now, You awesomely survived the Battle of Tarawa. Okay? You came back from the war. I ask you, do you move back to Bismarck? Or is San Diego the place you want to be? You move to California. Okay. And so a huge, huge shift in the American population happens, okay? Oftentimes just simply from servicemen returning home from the war. About 15 million Americans will change residences during the war years, okay? 15 million, okay? There's a huge shift, and by the way, it started a trend. This generation of people just did not know how to stay in one place. My dad, after the war, will move back to New York, and then he'll move to Seattle, then he'll move back to New York, and then he'll move to Los Angeles, and then he'll move in Los Angeles, okay? This generation of people just do not know how to sit still. They keep moving. So the main places that drew people, well, if you saw the movie, you know the phrase, if you build it, they will come. And how we're using it here is that you're building war factories, which means that's where the jobs are. And so if you live where there is not war factory, where do you move? To where there is war factory. And so, the places where the government had purposely placed many of the war factories were places that had been devastated during the Great Depression and needed a boost in their economies. And there were places like Detroit, okay, Seattle, Los Angeles, and Baton Rouge. And so, guess where people moved? Okay? If you build it, they will come. The state that saw the greatest increase in population at that time was California. 2 million people moved to California during the war. 2 million. We call it a second gold rush. Again, it will be trending. After the war, this continues. It continues throughout the 1950s, it continues throughout the 1960s, and finally, as we begin the 1970s, New York, which had been the most populous state, okay, since the 1840s, no longer the most populous state. California. Another group that will be affected by the war and move because of it will be American Indians. American Indians were particularly affected by the Great Depression, which is kind of hard to believe that anybody could be particularly affected by this thing that just affected so many people so badly. Okay? But basically, the economies on American Indian reservations were no economies. And so, when you now have war factories in the cities and stuff like that, you are in a place that you have nothing. Where are you going? Where you can make money. And so we see a huge migration of American Indians off of reservations and into American cities. American Indians will also play another very, very, very awesomely cool role during World War II. You see, during the war, communication, okay, was largely done via broadcasts, okay, broadcast signal that anybody can intercept and listen to. what some countries did to try and get around the fact that anybody can listen in is that they would basically start sending things in code. Okay? Germany did this, Japan did this, and turns out that the British are going to be able to break the German code. Okay, so if you saw the movie Imitation Game, okay, you know about the Enigma machine and how important that was as far as the war is concerned. The United States had a similar thing going on with something known as Operation Magic. And what Operation Magic had done is it had broken some of Japan's code, which will obviously be helpful to the United States during the war. The United States came up with a way of transmitting information that nobody could break. And basically what it was having two American Indians, particularly people from the Navajo Nation, simply talking to one another. We call them code talkers because, in effect, it was an undecipherable code because there was no written language. There was nothing written down. And so the only way people basically speaking Navajo. Nowhere else in the world did anybody speak this language. And so basically just two people speaking this language with no written form. There was no way the Germans or Japan could break it. Kind of awesome. Yeah.
They never tried like sending spies and like maybe like bribing Native Americans that way?
As far as we know, it was never broken. Migration. People coming to one place, filling cities, particularly cities like Detroit, will end up causing conflict. This was particularly true as people start moving into neighborhoods. Okay, so think of a city where jobs appear, but the housing did not necessarily quickly follow. And you have two groups both trying to get the housing at the same time. We ended up in conflict. Most famously in Detroit in 1943, there will be a riot that will leave some 34 people dead. Similarly, right here in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, however, the conflict was with Mexican American youth. Now, basically what the conflict kind of stemmed from was that, the kids, they were known for wearing really, really kind of flashy suits. They were called zoot suits. Okay? Awesome suits. And, when you're wearing this type of thing, are you hiding yourself, or are you kind of showing off? You're kind of showing off, right? Well, for some reason, when these guys are kind of showing off and a boatload of American sailors are in port, kind of took the showing off as an offense. And one day, the sailors start beating on these kids wearing the zoot suits. And so we're in Los Angeles, right? So who shows up? LAPD. Okay. Now, LAPD at that time in particular, it was an armed camp. Okay, they were very much known for being a tight. They consider themselves almost like a fighting force. And so they show up, and which side do you think they took? Okay, and so basically, we see here in this photograph is A, the sailors, okay, and B, the cops, and what is everybody carrying? Bats to beat people. Yeah.
Did anyone die?
I'm not sure. I know there were some murders that happened like right afterwards, but I don't know if anyone died in the riots themselves. That's a good one to look up. Yeah.
How old were those people that were wearing suits?
You're probably talking high teens, low 20s for the most part. You know, yeah.
When you say like murders afterwards, were they like premeditated or?
No, it was. It's actually we were not sure that they were called the Sleep Lagoon murders, and that have never been solved. Yeah.
How did they get these suits?
How do they get the suits? They
I mean,
just
like-
buy. Yeah, there's suits. There's suits. You go to the store, you buy suits.
Flashy
Yeah,
suits.
it's flashy suit.
What did you
It's
Yeah, it's
like
just a style.
bright blue, bright orange suits.
Yeah.
That's it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So like Mexicans were like not like generally others races didn't wear them.
In Malcolm X. wore
Yeah,
them.
yeah, I think so, but that's a little bit later. So I'm not sure if it would have been in all communities at that point, because this is in the 40s, and Malcolm X is a little bit later. The other thing that bringing people together will do, as people come together for jobs in cities and things like that, is what you're going to do is you're going to get people that when they were living in an isolated, maybe rural place, they were alone. Okay? But when they moved to the city, they found a community. And this was particularly true among gay men and lesbian women during the war, is that they were kind of drawn together in communities in American cities. And what kind of nurtured the development of these communities was, interestingly enough, the war. The war, A, it kept drawing more people in. B, a lot of people kind of had a c'est la vie attitude. You know, it's wartime. Tomorrow we may. And so people were less judgmental. And just the fact that people were less judgmental at that time allowed communities to develop. And what became kind of cool about this is that this makes it so that these communities kind of pre-exist and will be the centers of what becomes the gay rights movements of the 1960s and 70s. In the 1960s, most notably a movement that was actually sparked by a riot at the Stonewall Inn, okay, which kind of was like the spark of the gay rights movement. And then you see it going perhaps even further here in California, San Francisco, where Harvey Milk will run and win city council in the city of San Francisco as the first openly gay politician in the United States. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do something here. One last topic I wanted to do before we end today, and I want to give it its due because it's an important one. So could you write this down and turn it into your entrance ticket for next time? So just write down this. Describe the effects of internal migration during World War II. And I'll check it as your entrance ticket for next time. Liana, can you do me a favor? Can you remind me that I did this as an entrance ticket for next time? The reason I wanted to write it down is I do want to talk about this properly. After Pearl Harbor, the United States declares war on Japan. Military intelligence, maybe this time kind of an oxymoron, they are going to basically convince President Roosevelt that Japanese Americans presented a threat of sabotage. They would even go as far as to say that Japanese Americans could form a fifth column movement, resistance movement within the United States. And something needs to be done. Responding to this, FDR will issue an executive order. It was known as Executive Order 9066. And what it did is it authorized the United States military to round up Japanese Americans and place them in internment camps. Take a look at this poster in the back here. This is a reproduction of an actual poster which people were basically informed, if you were of Japanese ancestry. Okay, so no, it's not you are a Japanese immigrant, even. You are of Japanese ancestry, born here in the United States. You must present yourself to be relocated. You were given very little time to put your affairs in order, deal with your property, deal with your job. You were given very little opportunity as far as the amount of stuff you can take. And you were presented to be relocated. Now, initially what they did is they just simply rounded people up, and they didn't have anything really in mind as to where to place people. So they used big public arenas like Santa Anita Racetrack and placed people in horse stalls until they could build facilities. Eventually, here in California, one of the more famous relocation internment camps was, if you've ever been to Mammoth, if you drive up to the high desert, you'll pass Manzanar. All in all, some 110,000 Japanese Americans living on the West Coast will be placed in camps. Two-thirds of the people placed in camps were native-born Americans, born American citizens, that were just simply told that because of their race, they had to be in these camps. Once you were in the camp, the only way you could legally leave was to A, show that you had gainful employment on the East Coast, because there was less fear of an insurgency in the East, or B, you volunteered to go fight in Europe. Interestingly enough, despite the fact that there were more Japanese Americans in Hawaii, they decided not to pursue that policy there. They just did it more here. In California, which had a legacy, okay, like the Asiatic land law, which had forbidden Japanese Americans from owning land. This law will be held up, and I use the acronym. Who knows the acronym? Does anyone know what that one is? The Supreme Court of the United States. The Supreme Court of the United States is going to uphold this executive order. Okay. In a case, it's a couple cases, but in a case, Korematsu versus the United States, the Supreme Court is basically going to uphold this executive order. Since there has not been anything like this since, it is technically the standing precedent at the court. However, in 1984, during the Reagan administration, the United States government is going to decide to pay reparations to survivors from the camps, to people who were alive that had been in the camps. And then in 1988, the United States government formally apologized. Interestingly, and unlike World War I, World War I, German Americans had been highly targeted. This was not so much so in World War II. During World War II, for the most part, German and Italian immigrants were left largely alone. So now one more thing. Actually, two more things. The first of two last things. For me, there's a tiny, itty small silver lining for this. Okay. So, any of you go to Paul Revere? Know Mr. Honda? So Mr. Honda is a friend of mine. He was in my wedding. He was one of my groomsmen. Okay. So, the United States, when we created this internment policy, also asked our allies to do it. One of our allies was Argentina. But Argentina, when it, please don't pack while I'm talking, it's so not nice. Argentina, they didn't build their own camps. And so when they gathered people up, they sent their internees to American camps. One of the Japanese Argentinians that was sent to an American camp was Mr. Honda's dad. And there in the American camp, he met Mr. Honda's mom. So, the one good thing to come out of this whole thing is Mr. Honda. Okay. So, this is just a copy of the executive order. And then finally, as you're kind of parting, I want you to look at this. And what it is, it's a student newspaper from Roosevelt High School, right here in Los Angeles. And so this would have been people your age in high school at the time of the internment, and how they were processing it and how they were reacting to it at their school. Basically talking about the Japanese students that were going to withdraw from school. On the flip page, on the back page, it said that it was an advertising for, there was going to be a giant yard sale at the school, in which the Japanese students could bring their items that they couldn't take with them to the camps and sell them. Okay. And so with that, have a nice weekend.